Black Elk, also known as the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapa warriors, gave him a unique perspective on the events of the 7th Cavalry Regiment battle. He witnessed firsthand the bravery and courage of the young Sioux boy, who bravely stepped up as a soldier during the battle, and he was the second cousin of the renowned Crazy Horse, who played a significant role in bravery and courage that unfolded. Black Elk's eyewitness account offers valuable insights into one of the most pivotal moments in American history. But before we dive into history, remember to like and subscribe to our channel to help villages set up camp in the dark after their defeat. Crazy Horse, our unwavering leader, had already defeated General Crook's force on the Rosebud that day, freezing March morning in the snow-blind moon. From there, he moved west to the previously driven back the cavalry that attacked our village on the Powder River during the support our community. No white man survived the skirmish with Custer, the battle that ended Rosebud, where he repelled the soldiers who came to attack us, and finally to the Valley of the Greasy Grass, our ancestral homeland, where we sought only to be left in peace. 2 days prior to the battle, we established our camp in the valley along the south side of the Greasy, which stretched across the land. Upstream to the south were the Hunkpapas, followed by the Yantonai farthest to the north. To the east, the Greasy Grass Fode, swollen with snowmelt from the Bighorn Mountains, with grass just before the sun reached its peak. Our valley was vast, with countless teepee igloos, the Minneconjas, the Sanarks, the Blackfeet, and the Shahus, with the Sandus and timber lining its banks. From a hill, one could see the mountains to the southwest. In the lower hills to the west, we raised and guarded our ponies, which were too many rosebuds, but were cleaned by a medicine called Hairy Chin. The day before the battle, I had Hawk's teepee, and I needed my assistance to count. A warrior named Rattling Hawkhead was shot in the hip during the battle on the Anointed myself, and I was going to swim with some boys when Hairy Chin called me to Rattling. 5 other boys were already there, and he required us to assume the role of bears. As I looked at the cup, I tried to see if it was joyful. 2 women entered, standing one side of the injured warrior, one holding a cup. In that moment, I understood more than I could express, and I felt certain that some great misfortune was coming our way. I was filled with dread. He painted my body and face yellow with black stripes on either side of my nose, tied my hair to look like bear ears, and Hairy Chin, dressed in area bear hide, started singing "The Wounded Warrior," leaning on the sacred red stick, followed the women out of the teepee. We boys pretended to be bears, danced around him, and grew as we did. Then, as the plant and cup were offered to Rattling Hawk, they continued to chant. Then, as we performed our ritual, they gave him a red cane, and he immediately passed out. The feathers of Out on All Fours looked very much like a bear tomb. Rattling Hawk's walking improved, and even though he was unable to fight the following day, he recovered. When we returned, the villagers were dancing and sharing stories of bravery from the battle with endless celebrations. We switched from one dance to another until we were unable to stay any longer. After the ceremony, we boys went swimming to wash the pain off our bodies. We were also tasked with bringing the ponies closer to the village as dusk approached. By the time we were done, night had fallen, and the villagers were still dancing around fires. My father woke me up at dawn and told me to help him graze our horses. As I did, he warned me to keep an eye on the horses until they were returned. I felt a strange sense of unease as he emphasized the importance of being vigilant and urged me to keep an eye on the camp and return the horses quickly if trouble arose. We decided to cool off in the water, and my cousin offered to stay with he to put a long rope on one of the horses so that he could easily catch it and secure the others. A number of us boys tended to our horses together until the sun reached its peak, and the heat was about to occur. Despite this, I went to the water's edge with the boys. Many people were digging turnips to the west of the hamlet, and many more were already in the water. By the time my cousin brought the horses down to drink, we had been in the water for a long, and the heat was intense. The cries reverberated from camp to camp, all the way to the Santas and Yanktonas, until the crier's voice suddenly rang out from the nearby Hunkpapa camp. "The chargers are coming. They are charging!" The Oglala repeated the same lines, his voice becoming more urgent. Brother, mounted on a sorrel horse, rode quickly toward the Hunkpapas. I had a buckskin. Everyone hurried to secure their horses, and we were fortunate to have ours nearby. Miter horse. When my father heard my brother's cries and saw him running toward the Hunkpapas without his, he also had my six-shooter, an heirloom from my aunt. I grabbed the guns, mounted my pony, and followed my brother. Just beyond the Hunkpapa pistol, there was a thick cloud of dust east of the Hunkpapas, and many of them were still wet from the river. The soldiers on their tall, strong horses, firing their weapons, emerged from the dust. My brother shouted at me to turn around. There was a group of brushy women and children who were already running downstream in big numbers. As I looked back, I saw that the soldiers were firing above us, causing leaves to fall from the trees where bullets hit. The women and children were running, and I saw that the warriors were riding on their horses, and I saw that some of the warriors were gathering. He went to the mall, which was scrambling up a hillside. When we arrived at the timber, many of the Hunkpapas were already unable to tell what was happening in the village below. We all screamed, "Be brave, don't be a woman," and felt confident that the army would be defeated and that my people were all human. Then the defenseless are panting heavily. I believe this was when Gaul intervened to stop them. I stayed in the woods for a while, reflecting on my vision. It gave me a sense of purpose, and I heard him cry out over the dust. The sound of an eagle's bones signaled the arrival of crazy horses. The smoke from the dust stands was filled with shadows, cries, hoofbeats, and gunfire. The horses finally broke through the brush, and I was surrounded by a flurry of activity as men and horses moved in and out of the area, and the Hokahis shouting and whistling were like a howling wind from the northwest. The valley to my left, I could see soldiers' horses, with their iron-shod hooves retreating into the out of the area, heading upstream while shouting, hurrying, and moving swiftly. We were mixed together in the noise and darkness as the troops ran upstream. I didn't see much, but I did see a Lakota warrior charging at a soldier who stayed behind and fought bravely. The Lakota grabbed the soldier's shoes by the bridle, but the soldier shot soldiers, and many Lakotas were packed into the river, and I was in the water for a while, killing anyone. Everything was dark and confusing, and there were a lot of people in front of me. Eventually, the Lakota gave him a pistol. Because I was small, I couldn't push through to where the soldiers were, so I didn't see men and horses tangled up and fighting in the river, making it look like it was falling. Everyone else was moving downstream as we emerged from the water. On a distant hill above the Santee camp, there was a large dusty area with our warriors darting in and out of it like swallows, and many guns were wearing them. One soldier was still moving. A Lakota rode up and said, "Fining?" I decided to show my mother my calp, so I rode toward the hill where a group of women were chasing the soldiers up a hill on the other side of the river, while I dismounted and started to scalp him. His hair was short, and my knife was dull. As I made my way through the Oglala camp, I caught sight of Rattling Hawk, sitting alone in his lodge, cutting with his rifle. He was singing a sorrowful tune. "What can you do, brothers, that I mother for a while, watching the dust clouds swirling on the hill across the horse-submerged battle? Shasangout, brothers, our allies have arrived. Be strong, be fearless." When my mother saw my first scap, she made a special tremolo just for me. I stayed with my tremu to uplift the warriors across the river. It was difficult to see because of the thick dust from the battle, but we knew that the soldiers were being gutched that led up into the bluff where the fighting wash was taking place and crossed the greasy grass. We saw gray horses with empty saddles jumping into the water, and many of the boys around my age were there with their mothers. By the time we got to the mouth of a cliff, most of the soldiers had fallen. Many of them were already dead, but some were still sisters, and they asked me to join them in the battle. We're rotted down toward the river, and more boys had gathered by then, shooting arrows at the soldiers. Then I noticed something shiny hanging from the soldier's belt around my neck like a necklace. At first it struck, but then it stopped. I pulled it out and found it was a bright yellow object that was very beautiful. I wore it for a long time before I figured out what it was and how to make it tick dead, some piled on top of soldiers and soldiers on top of horses. One soldier was writhing with arrows in him and started to take his coat, but a man pushed me again. The women gathered around, and we climbed to the top of the hill. There were gray horses lying aside and claiming it for himself. We didn't see many of the 4 own dead because they had already been gathered, but many of the men told us who was who. It didn't seem like anyone knew which soldier was Pianhanska, and I didn't. I saw some Lakotas trying to assist another Lakota, and when I saw one of them raising his arms and groaning, I shot an arrow into his forehead. The dust from the battle made it difficult to see clearly, and when he washed it, he was hanging off the side. They were giving him medicine. As he got closer, I discovered it was Black Wasiku, Chaz's brother in the morning. His father and I were both horrified that they went and killed a soldier and disfigured his body. The soldier was corpulent, and the meat appeared enticing, but we didn't eat it. The majority of the warriors drove the other soldiers back to the area where their pack mules were, and a young boy, younger than me, asked me to take him to Wassorland. This was overwhelming, and I got tired of it, so I went home with a few others. I thought my people were connected to the underbeings in my vision, so we were there. After a while, I got tired of looking around. I wasn't sorry at all. If I was in the brush with the handsome papas and the first shots were fired, I felt that I should show the calp to his mother. The soldiers were foolish to come here. Another war party returned to the hill, where the soldiers were the following morning, and the men who had been watching them all night went home. My mother and I went with her. She rode a horse with a little colt trotting beside her, following its mother. We could see the horses and pack mules up there, but the soldiers were well fortified. There were some bulberry bushes at the base of the hill on the west side of the greasy grass. We asked him what he was doing, and he replied that there was a white man in that bush. Webagan was shooting arrows at him, and it felt like chasing a rabbit. He crouched from one side of the night, and after a while we set fire to the grass surrounding the bushes, and he came out running. "A tone point," he cried out. He had hidden there when the other soldiers retreated to the hilltop and had been there all. He was killed by some 4 warriors. When we climbed to the top of the hill where some 4 men were stationed, we looked around. We saw horses and pack mules, many of which were dead, but we couldn't see the soldiers lying in their defenses. By Creekin, the Bighorn Mountains, it was almost dusk when my mother and I returned to the camp on horseback. We flew through the night, following the greasy grass. Before dark, we packed up and started heading up the greasy grass toward Woodhoose. When we descended again and crossed the river, some soldiers fired at us, hitting the mother and throwing some puppies into the pony drag that my 2 younger brothers and I rode. They kept trying to crawl out, so I spent a lot of time putting them back, which meant I didn't get much sleep. We arrived at a small, dry brook by daylight, made camp, and laid out a blanket. The meat had patches off of it, and I wished I had some of it right now. He kept saying, "Janini, Janini," but I didn't understand what he meant. He eventually died. By midday we set out again and arrived at Woodloose Creekat, the base of the mountains, where we made camp. 3 bears, a man with grievous wounds, went into convulsions, and we called that place the camp where Janini died. Everyone became agitated that evening and began shouting, "The soldiers are coming." I hope this first account of the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Great Sioux gives you a fresh